Most humans in prehistory did not live in a world where age was allowed to arrive slowly. Reaching 30 was not only about having a strong body, or good genes, or the hidden ability to grow old. It was about surviving birth, infection, hunger, injury, cold nights, broken teeth, dangerous seasons, and years when a small mistake could become final. The strange part is that the human body was already capable of living much longer, yet the prehistoric world often removed people before that longer life could begin. So why did so many humans in prehistory never reach 30? When modern people hear that many humans in prehistory may not have reached 30, it is easy to imagine a world where everyone was old by 25, worn out by 28, and almost gone before the age that we now call young adulthood. But that picture is too simple. It makes the ancient human body look weaker than it really was, and it makes prehistoric life sound like a straight road toward early death. The truth was quieter, and in some ways, colder. The number 30 does not only tell us about how long a body could live, it also tells us about how many people never survived the gates before it. A baby had to survive birth. A child had to survive fever, hunger, cold, injury, parasites, and the loss of care. A young adult had to survive wounds, infected teeth, dangerous travel, difficult pregnancies, seasonal food shortages, and accidents that modern life often hides from us. So when we speak about humans not reaching 30, we are not looking at a simple timer placed inside the body. We are looking at a landscape filled with interruptions. Some people did live longer. Some prehistoric adults almost certainly reached later ages, and their knowledge may have mattered deeply to the people around them. But many others never arrived there, not because human life naturally ended at 30, but because the path toward 30 was narrow, uneven, and exposed. This is the first mistake the title can create in the mind. It can sound as if prehistoric humans were biologically designed to die young. That would be misleading. The human body, even in deep prehistory, carried many of the same basic possibilities that our bodies carry now. It could heal bone, it could form memory, it could adapt to hardship, it could keep moving for many years if enough food, safety, and care were available. The deeper question is why those conditions were so often missing. At the beginning of the human story, life did not unfold inside walls, clinics, stored grain rooms, clean water systems, or protected childhoods. It unfolded under weather, beside animals, across uneven ground, near fire, near hunger, and inside small groups where survival depended on timing, luck, knowledge, and the strength of others. To understand why many did not reach 30, we have to slow the number down. 30 was not only an age, it was a distance. It was years of breathing through smoke, sleeping near the ground, chewing hard food, carrying children, walking after animals, watching the sky for weather, and trusting that the next season would bring enough. It was a distance across infancy, childhood, infection, injury, and reproduction. In modern life, a year can feel like a page on a calendar. In prehistory, a year could be a full test of the body. A dry season could thin the group. A cold season could weaken children first. A small wound on the foot could change how far someone could walk. A tooth infection could make eating painful at the very moment when food was already scarce. None of these dangers needed to be dramatic. They could be slow, ordinary, and almost invisible until the body no longer had enough reserve to recover. That is why averages can mislead us. If many infants and children died young, the average age at death would fall sharply. Even if some adults lived well beyond 30, the number becomes a shadow cast by many early losses. It does not mean that every adult was near death at 29. It means that the road to adulthood itself was dangerous enough to pull the whole human picture downward. This matters because the story of prehistoric age is not only about death, it is about selection, memory, care, and the fragile line between what the human body can survive and what the world allows it to survive. The first humans did not begin with comfort and then lose it. They began with exposure, and from that exposure they slowly built tools, fire use, shelter, language, cooperation, and later, much later, the safer worlds that made long life more common. So before asking why many humans in prehistory never reached 30, we have to ask a calmer question first. How many lives were shortened before age itself ever became the real enemy? The safest way to understand the age of prehistoric humans is not to picture one person and ask how old that person looked at death. It is better to picture a whole group across time. A few infants are born. Some survive the first cold nights. Some do not. Children begin to crawl near the edge of a shelter, near ash, stone, animal bone, damp ground, and the bodies of adults who are tired from moving. Some children grow strong enough to follow the group. Others are weakened by fever, bad water, hunger, or an illness no one can name. A few young people become skilled, useful, watchful, and strong. Some are lost to injury, infection, childbirth, conflict, accident, or a season when food becomes harder to find. Then, among those who pass through all these dangers, some adults continue into later life. This is why the number can feel confusing. It does not describe one simple human fate. It describes a population moving through many gates, with losses at each gate, long before old age stands at the end of the road. Modern people often hear an average and imagine a normal life, but an average is not a story of one person. It is a shadow made by many lives added together. If several lives end very early, they pull that shadow downward. A person who dies in infancy and another who dies in later adulthood can produce a number that sounds like neither life. This is one reason the phrase "never reached 30" must be handled carefully. It can point toward a real pattern in harsh ancient conditions, but it can also hide the difference between dying young and aging fast. Those are not the same thing. A person may die young because the world is dangerous, not because the body has reached its natural limit. A child may die before the body has even begun to show what it could become. A young adult may die from a wound that would be treated today, or from a birth that would now happen with help nearby. The body's clock was not always the main cause. Often, the environment interrupted the clock. This matters deeply for the human beginning, because early humans were not living outside nature as observers, they were inside it. Their bodies were part of the same weather, the same scarcity, the same animal movement, the same seasonal pressure as everything around them. They were intelligent, social, and adaptable, but they were still made of skin, blood, bone, hunger, sleep, and heat. A clever mind could remember where water might be found, but it could not make clean water appear from nothing. A strong hand could shape a stone edge, but it could not stop every infection after the skin was opened. A caring group could protect a child, but it could not remove all cold, all parasites, all accidents, or all bad years. This is the quiet difference between ability and protection. Human beings had abilities. Prehistoric life did not always give those abilities enough protection to last. When we look backward, the evidence is uneven. Soft tissue disappears, many lives leave no full story. Archaeology gives us bones, teeth, tools, hearths, burial traces, settlement patterns, and sometimes signs of injury or disease. These traces do not let us speak with perfect certainty about every group, every place, or every age, but they do help us understand the larger shape. Life before farming, before cities, before written medicine, before sanitation, before reliable food storage, was not one single condition. Some environments were richer than others. Some groups may have eaten better in some seasons. Some had more stable landscapes, while others faced sharp changes. Still, across the deep human past, survival depended on passing through dangers that modern people rarely meet in the same direct way. The beginning of humanity was not just a beginning in time, it was a beginning in exposure. Before wools became common, before grain could be stored in large amounts, before specialists could spend their whole lives treating illness, a human life had to remain close to the land that supported it. That closeness gave knowledge, but it also gave risk. It meant that weather entered the body through cold, food shortage entered the body through weakness, infection entered through a cut, childbirth entered through blood and pain. Injury entered through distance, because a damaged leg could mean being unable to keep pace with the group. So the question of age becomes larger than a number. It becomes a question about how much danger a life had to cross before it could become old. This is why the age of 30 should not be heard as a wall that every prehistoric person struck and could not pass. It is closer to a marker on a long path. Many people may never have reached that marker because the early path was crowded with risk. Others did reach it, and some moved beyond it. The mystery is not that the human body had no future after youth. The mystery is how often that future was taken away before it had time to appear. The misunderstanding becomes easier to see when we stop imagining prehistory as one dark, violent scene and begin to imagine it as a long series of ordinary mornings. A person wakes near the remains of a fire. The air is cold enough to make the joints stiff. A child coughs nearby. Someone checks the edge of a stone tool. Someone else looks toward the distance, not because a great danger is coming in a dramatic way, but because the group needs to know whether the day can safely begin. In that kind of world, survival was not decided only by strength. It was decided by the small conditions that surrounded strength. Was there enough food left from yesterday? Was the weather turning? Was the water source safe enough? Could the injured person still walk? Would a fever pass? Or would it deepen through the night? These questions did not belong to one rare emergency. They belong to life itself. That is why the age of 30 should be understood as a point, reached after many quiet negotiations with the world. A human body could be capable, alert, skilled, and still remain vulnerable to things that modern life has pushed into the background. Today, many people can pass through childhood without thinking about how many protections are holding them up. Clean water, cooked food, antibiotics, surgery, vaccines, stable shelter, stored supplies, and emergency care all stand between the body and many older dangers. In deep prehistory, those protections were absent, limited, or held only in simpler forms by knowledge, fire, tools, and group care. These were powerful, but they were not complete shields. Fire could warm a camp, but it could not prevent every winter from being hard. A tool could cut meat or shape wood, but it could not close every wound safely. Group care could keep a weak person alive longer than isolation would, but care itself required energy from others who were also hungry, tired, or exposed. Human cooperation was already one of our great strengths, yet cooperation had to operate inside a world that gave no guarantee. This is where the origin of our species becomes important. Humans did not begin as creatures standing above nature with full control. They began as animals who slowly learned to negotiate with nature through memory, hands, fire, movement, and shared attention. Long before cities or written records, the human advantage was not perfect safety. It was the ability to reduce danger a little, then a little more, across generations. Each improvement mattered. A better shelter mattered. A safer camp mattered. Knowledge of edible plants mattered. A remembered path to water mattered. But none of these erased the basic fact that life began in exposure. So when many lives ended before 30, the cause was often not one single enemy. It was the accumulation of small risks around the body. A child weakened by poor nutrition might be less able to survive infection. A young adult with an injured foot might move less efficiently during a difficult season. A person with severe tooth pain might eat less, sleep worse, and lose strength at the wrong time. A mother recovering from birth might need support at the exact moment when the group had little spare energy. Each problem could make the next problem heavier. Prehistoric life did not need to be constant disaster for it to be dangerous. It only needed to be thin in reserves. Modern people often survive illness because there is extra support around them. Food can be bought, water can be cleaned, pain can be treated, a wound can be watched. A dangerous birth can be helped by skilled hands and modern tools. In prehistory, help existed, but its reach was shorter. A group could know many things and still lose someone. A healer could understand plants, wounds, warmth, and rest, yet still face limits. No knowledge could cross at the time. This gives the title its real meaning. It is not saying that prehistoric humans were failed versions of us. It is saying that they were complete humans, living under conditions where the margin for survival was much smaller. Their bodies were not empty of potential. Their world was short on protection. That difference matters because it changes the emotional shape of the question. Instead of asking why ancient people were so fragile, we begin to ask how any of them survived long enough to become parents, guides, memory keepers, and elders at all. The answer cannot be given too quickly, because it sits inside many layers: birth, childhood, infection, hunger, injury, reproduction, group size, climate, and the slow growth of human culture. Age 30 becomes a doorway through which some people passed and many others did not. Behind that doorway was not a magical change in the body, but a rare continuation of life after the most dangerous early years. The first step is simply to remove the wrong image. Prehistory was not a place where everyone became old at 30. It was a world where too many lives were stopped before they had the chance to show how long a human life could truly become. Birth was the first dangerous gate a human life had to pass through, and it came before memory, before walking, before speech, before any person could help themselves. This is one of the quiet reasons the age of 30 becomes so difficult to understand from a modern distance. We usually think of danger as something that happens after a life has already begun. A storm, a wound, a bad winter, a hungry season, a fall on stone ground. But for ancient humans, the danger began at the doorway into life itself. A newborn arrived weak, dependent, unable to move away from cold, unable to feed without help, unable to understand pain, unable to survive alone for even a short time. And the mother, at the same moment, was also passing through one of the most demanding events the human body can endure. Birth was not just the beginning of a child. It was a test of two bodies at once. This matters because the human body carries an unusual story. Compared with many animals, human babies are born very helpless. They need long care. They need warmth, milk, carrying, cleaning, protection, and constant attention. Part of this comes from the way human evolution shaped us. Upright walking, large brains, complex development, and a long childhood. These traits helped make humans adaptable, social, and intelligent. But they also made the beginning of life fragile. The same species that could make tools, remember landscapes, share food, and learn from elders also brought its children into the world in a state of deep dependence. That is not a flaw. It is part of the trade-off that sits near the root of being human. Long before hospitals, clean delivery rooms, surgical help, antibiotics, or modern infant care, birth depended on the mother's body, the skill and presence of nearby people, the conditions of the group, and the mercy of timing. If food had been scarce, the mother might already be weakened. If the weather was cold, the newborn had less protection. If infection entered after birth, there were few ways to stop it. If bleeding became severe, knowledge and care could help only so far. We should not imagine prehistoric birth as constant disaster, because that would be too simple and too dramatic. Many births succeeded, many mothers survived, many children grew. Every human alive today is proof that countless ancient births ended not in loss, but in continuation. Still, the risk was real enough to shape the age structure of early human groups. Before a person could ever become a hunter, a gatherer, a parent, a maker of tools, or a keeper of memory, they first had to survive this first narrow passage. The newborn body was especially sensitive because it had so little reserve. A small drop in warmth mattered. A weak feeding period mattered. A sickness that an older child might survive could be far more dangerous in the first days or months. The beginning of human life was not protected by layers of modern systems. It rested in arms, hides, firelight, shared attention, and the fragile strength of a group that had other needs pressing against it. Someone had to find food. Someone had to keep watch. Someone had to move when the landscape required movement. A baby made the group more human, but also more vulnerable, because care takes time and energy. Here, the question of why many humans in prehistory never reached 30 becomes clearer. Many lives were not shortened after decades of aging. Many were lost before age had any meaning at all. The number 30 is pulled downward by those who never reached childhood, and by children who never reached adulthood. This does not make prehistoric people primitive or careless. It shows how expensive human life was from the very start. A human baby was not simply born into a family. It was born into weather, hunger, infection, movement, and dependence. The first gate was not crossed by strength alone. It was crossed by care, timing, food, warmth, and luck. And if that gate closed too soon, the long possibility inside the human body never had time to open. One reason birth was so dangerous for ancient humans is that the human body carries a difficult bargain. Our ancestors became upright walkers, moving on two legs across open ground, forest edges, river valleys, coastlines, and changing landscapes. At the same time, the human brain became large and slow to mature. These two facts met most sharply at birth. A baby had to pass through a body shaped for walking, while also carrying the early form of a brain that would need many years to grow. This does not mean birth was impossible or unnatural. It means that human birth has long required support, timing, and care in a way that reveals something deep about our species. We were not born as independent creatures. We were born unfinished, and then finished slowly by touch, milk, warmth, protection, and the presence of others. In prehistory, that long dependence mattered for survival. A newborn could not cling and travel easily like some young animals. A baby could not follow a group across rough ground. A baby could not regulate cold well, find food, or escape insects, smoke, dampness, or danger. Every hour of life depended on someone else, noticing, holding, feeding, warming, and carrying. That made the first months of life both deeply human and deeply fragile. The beginning of the human story was not only tools and fire, it was also the quiet weight of infants against adult bodies as people moved through landscapes that did not pause for them. When a group had to shift camp, cross water, follow food, or endure a bad season, babies and mothers carried the highest cost. Care was not an idea. Care was physical work. It meant calories spent by the mother to produce milk. It meant time spent by others to gather food, protect space, and help with older children. It meant a group had to keep fragile life alive while still meeting the demands of hunger, weather, and movement. This is why the age of 30 cannot be understood only by looking at adult strength. Many lives were shaped before strength had any chance to appear. If a child died in the first year, that loss entered the population picture just as much as the death of a grown adult. Many early losses could make a whole population seem young at death, even while some adults lived into later years. The danger was not simply that ancient people aged quickly. The danger was that many never reached the years where aging would become visible. Archaeology cannot show us every newborn, every difficult birth, or every small fever that ended a life. Many infant remains do not survive well, and many groups left only faint traces. But the larger biological pattern is clear enough to speak carefully. Human infants require unusually long care. Human mothers faced real physical demands. Small groups had limited protection against infection, blood loss, cold, hunger, and exhaustion. None of this needs to be exaggerated. It is already enough. The most important point is not that prehistoric birth was always tragic. It was not. If it had been, we would not be here. The point is that every successful birth opened a long period of risk that had to be managed again and again. A baby who survived the first night still had to survive the next fever. A mother who survived birth still had to recover, feed, and remain strong enough to continue. The group had to absorb the cost. Human life began, from the very beginning, as a shared burden. That may be one of the oldest truths about us. Before writing, before farming, before villages, before medicine, a human life could only begin because other humans made space for it. And when that space failed, age 30 became unreachable not because life was meant to end early, but because the first years asked for more protection than the ancient world could always give. To see why birth changed the whole shape of prehistoric age, we have to imagine life not from the moment a person could run, hunt, gather, speak, or remember, but from the moment a body first had to be kept alive. A newborn did not enter the world as a small adult. It entered as a promise that required protection before it could become strength. This is one of the deepest differences between human survival and the simple idea of toughness. The future adult might one day carry food, read tracts, make tools, remember water sources, calm a frightened child, or guide others through a hard season. But at the beginning, that same future depended on breath, milk, warmth, and a pair of arms that could not always rest. In a prehistoric camp, a baby's life was tied to the condition of everyone around it. If the mother was weak, the baby was at risk. If food was scarce, milk could become harder to sustain. If the group needed to move, the baby had to be carried. If the weather turned cold, warmth had to be shared. If sickness entered the camp, the smallest bodies had the least reserve. This does not mean early humans lacked love or care. It means care itself had to fight against the world, and that fight began before any child could choose anything. The age of 30, from this angle, is not just a mark on a human life. It is the far side of many successful acts of protection. A person who reached that age had already passed through birth, feeding, childhood illness, injury, hunger, and the long, slow years of learning how to live. Many did not pass through all of them. The losses that happened near the beginning mattered greatly because they changed the whole age pattern of a group. When infants and young children die more often, the average age at death falls, even if some adults live much longer. This is why we have to be careful with the title. It is not saying that a person who reached 29 was already ancient, or that the human body suddenly failed at 30. It is pointing toward a world where the early doors of life were narrow. The first door was birth. The next was infancy. Then came childhood, when the body was stronger than before, but still dependent on food, warmth, protection, and the watchfulness of others. Human evolution made this dependence unusually long. A deer can stand soon after birth. Many animals move into the world faster than we do. Humans grow slowly. Our brains keep developing for years. Our skills are learned across time. Our survival depends not only on instinct, but on teaching, imitation, memory, and belonging. This long childhood helped make human culture possible, but it also stretched the period during which a young life could be lost before it became fully independent. That is the quiet bargain at the root of our species. The same long development that allowed language, tools, cooperation, and deep memory also meant that every child represented years of care before return. In the beginning of the human story, this care was not supported by stored abundance or modern medicine. It was supported by bodies, attention, experience, and the small protections people could create around fire and shelter. A successful birth was not the end of danger. It was the opening of a longer, fragile passage. Each day a child survived, the group carried the possibility of a future adult. Each loss shortened not only one life, but also a possible memory, a possible parent, a possible set of hands, a possible voice in the group. This is why prehistoric age cannot be understood only by counting years. It has to be understood through the cost of keeping a human life alive long enough for years to matter. Many humans never reach 30 because many lives were interrupted at the beginning, when the body was still unfinished and the world offered no guarantee. Before old age could take a person, birth and infancy had already asked their question. Childhood in prehistory was not a quiet waiting room where a small human simply grew until adulthood arrived. It was a long crossing. After birth and infancy, a child still had to pass through years when the body was growing, learning, and depending on others, but not yet strong enough to carry the full weight of survival. This is easy to forget now, because modern childhood is often surrounded by rooms, food, schedules, medicine, clean water, and adults whose main worry is keeping a child healthy long enough to become independent. In much of the deep human past, childhood unfolded much closer to the ground. A child sat near ash. Animal hides, stone flakes, bones, insects, smoke, damp soil, and the footsteps of adults moving in and out of camp. The world was not built around children. Children had to grow inside a world that was already difficult for adults. A fever could begin as something small. A cough could linger. A cut could become swollen. A stomach illness could drain a body that had little extra energy. Hunger did not always look like dramatic starvation. Sometimes it was simply not enough fat, not enough protein, not enough steady food for a growing body to recover well. For a child, that mattered more. Growth itself is expensive. Bones lengthen, muscles strengthen, the immune system learns, the brain keeps building its pathways, and all of it requires energy. When food was seasonal, uncertain, or hard to obtain, the young body had less room for error. This helps explain why many humans in prehistory never reached 30 without turning the title into a false claim that everyone died young. The danger was not waiting only at the end of life. It was spread across the beginning. A child who could survive one bad month might still be weakened for the next illness. A child who lost a mother, or lost access to milk too early, or entered a season when adults were already tired, might face risks that left almost no mark for archaeology to find. Many of these lives vanished softly from the record. Bones of children are smaller and often preserve less well. Their stories do not always remain in the earth, but the biological truth is simple enough to hold carefully. Young humans need care for a long time, and long care is fragile when the whole group lives close to hunger, weather, and infection. This long childhood is one of the strange gifts and costs of being human. Our ancestors were not born ready. They had to learn the world slowly. A child had to learn what could be eaten, what should be avoided, how fire behaved, where adults looked when they listened, how tools were held, how danger sounded, how paths were remembered, and how the group moved through different seasons. This slow learning made human culture possible. It allowed knowledge to pass from body to body, from voice to voice, long before writing. But it also meant that every young life required years of protection before it could fully protect itself. In a small prehistoric group, a child was not only a mouth to feed, a child was a future pair of hands, a future memory, a future parent, a future keeper of skills. Yet that future had to be carried through many ordinary dangers first. Cold nights could take strength, smoke could irritate the lungs, parasites could weaken the belly. A fall could damage a limb. A contaminated water source could make several children sick at once. None of this needs to be imagined as constant panic. Most days may have been ordinary. People gathered, carried, repaired, watched, rested, and moved. But ordinary did not mean safe. The early human world could be calm and still remain unforgiving. That is the quiet point. Many prehistoric children were not defeated by one great disaster. They were tested by repeated small pressures before their bodies had built enough reserve. If they passed through those years, they came closer to the age where skill, strength, and memory could begin to protect them. If they did not, the road to 30 ended before adulthood truly began. A prehistoric child did not have to understand danger for danger to reach the body. This is one of the hard truths behind the low ages we often associate with the deep past. The young body was learning the world slowly, but the world did not wait for learning to finish. A child could sit near the edge of a camp and breathe smoke because smoke was part of warmth. A child could drink from the same water that adults trusted because there was no better source nearby. A child could follow older people over uneven ground before the legs were fully steady because movement was part of life. Nothing about this required neglect. It was simply the condition of being human before protected spaces became normal. The early years were filled with care, but care took place inside exposure. That difference matters. Modern people often imagine safety as something personal, as if love and attention alone can protect a child from most danger. In prehistory, love and attention were powerful, but they did not remove bad water, cold air, intestinal parasites, infected skin, or a season when food came back slowly. Adults could carry a child, warm a child, feed a child, and watch a child, but they could not place the child outside the environment. The environment entered through the mouth, the lungs, the skin, and the belly. It entered through the simple fact that a growing body needs more than survival. It needs regular energy to build bone, repair tissue, and fight illness. A child who was only barely fed was still alive, but not equally protected. The body might grow more slowly. Recovery might take longer. A fever might become more serious. Another infection might arrive before strength had returned. This is how childhood could pull many lives away from the path toward 30 without leaving behind a dramatic story. A child did not need to face one great catastrophe. The body could be worn down by several smaller pressures, each one ordinary in itself. This also connects to one of the oldest human advantages: shared care. Human children likely benefited not only from mothers, but from other adults and older children who helped carry, feed, teach, and watch. That kind of cooperation is part of why our species could raise such dependent young at all. But shared care was never unlimited. Every helper was also a body that needed food. Every hour spent caring was an hour not spent gathering, repairing, watching, or moving. In a small group, a sick child changed the rhythm of everyone nearby. The group might slow down. Someone might stay close to the fire. Someone might share food that was already limited. These choices could save lives, and often they must have done so. But they also show why human childhood was expensive. It asked the group to invest in a future that was not guaranteed. At the beginning of the human story, that investment was one of the foundations of culture. A child survived by being held inside a web of memory and attention. Adults knew which plants were safer, where water sometimes remained, how to keep fire alive, how to read animal movement, how to choose shelter, and when to leave a place before it failed. A child slowly absorbed this knowledge by being near it. Yet this learning took years. Before the child could become useful in a full adult way, the group had to keep the child alive through repeated seasons. That long delay was both a strength and a risk. It gave humans minds that could learn deeply, but it also stretched vulnerability across a long time. This is why the question of age cannot be separated from childhood. When many people in prehistory did not reach 30, some of those missing lives were children who never reached the age where their skills could protect them. They were not weak versions of adults. They were unfinished humans inside a world with little spare protection. The road to 30 passed first through fever, cold, hunger, smoke, water, movement, and the patience of others. And for many young lives, that road became too narrow before adulthood had truly begun. Childhood was one of the long, hidden filters of prehistoric life. It did not end in one clear moment, and it did not protect a young person simply because adults were near. A child had to become strong gradually, season by season, while still being exposed to the same world that tested everyone else. There was no clean boundary where danger paused and growth continued safely. The body was always doing several things at once. It was growing bone, building muscle, learning balance, fighting infection, staying warm, digesting uncertain food, and trying to recover after each small illness. In a world with little spare energy, that was a heavy demand. A child could survive a fever and still be thinner afterward. A child could recover from hunger and still carry less strength into the next cold season. A child could heal from a cut and still be more vulnerable if food was poor. The road toward adulthood was not only about staying alive today, it was about having enough reserve left for tomorrow. This is why many early losses may have shaped the whole age pattern of prehistoric groups. A child who disappeared from the living group before adulthood did not leave behind a full adult skeleton with a long record of work, injury, and age. Often, that life left only a faint trace, or no trace at all. The earth does not preserve every small body, every camp, every illness, or every quiet burial. So the human past comes to us unevenly. We see stone tools more clearly than coughs. We see teeth more clearly than hunger. We see healed bones more clearly than the children whose bodies did not last long enough to heal. This makes the question of age more delicate. The missing children are part of the answer, even when they are hard to see. To understand why so many humans in prehistory may not have reached 30, we have to include the years before a person could leave many marks behind. The origin of human life was not only the origin of clever hands and large brains, it was also the origin of a long childhood that needed protection for many years. That long childhood allowed humans to learn more than instinct could give. It allowed a child to watch how adults broke stone, carried fire, shared food, recognized danger, and remembered places across seasons. It gave human beings the ability to live by culture, not only by body, but the cost was time. A young human needed years before knowledge became useful strength. During those years, illness, cold, hunger, and accident could still end the story early. That is the quiet loss inside the number 30. It includes futures that never had time to become visible. It includes children who might have become skilled adults, parents, guides, toolmakers, watchers, singers, or memory keepers, but who never crossed the slow bridge into adult life. This does not mean prehistory was only sorrow. It means survival was precious because it was uncertain. Every child who lived through enough seasons carried proof that care had worked, at least for a time. Someone had fed them. Someone had warmed them. Someone had noticed when they were too weak. Someone had kept them near the group, near the fire, near the knowledge that made humans human. When that care succeeded, the group gained more than another body. It gained another mind capable of learning the old paths. But when care failed, or when the world became too hard for care to overcome, the path to 30 ended quietly. So childhood was not a pause before the real struggle. It was one of the struggle's deepest places. Before old age, before adult labor, before the visible marks of a long life, a human had to survive the slow and fragile years when the body was still becoming itself. A small wound can look harmless when we imagine it from the safety of the present. A cut on the foot, a torn palm, a bite that breaks the skin, a thorn that goes too deep, a tooth that begins to ache. Today, these things are often treated quickly, cleaned, covered, watched, or brought to someone with medicine. In prehistory, the same small opening in the body could become a passage for danger. This is one of the quiet reasons many humans may never have reached 30. The body was not weak. Skin can close, blood can clot, bone can mend, the immune system can fight. But healing is not magic. It needs time, energy, rest, warmth, and a body strong enough to keep defending itself. In the ancient world, those conditions were never guaranteed. A person with an injured foot might still need to walk. A person with a cut hand might still need to carry, scrape, dig, climb, gather, or hold a child. A person with fever might still be lying in a camp where smoke, cold, insects, and hunger kept pressing in. The wound itself was only the beginning. What came after could decide whether the body returned to life or slowly lost ground. Before antibiotics, before antiseptic surgery, before clean bandages, before a full understanding of microbes, infection was one of the great invisible forces around human life. It did not need to announce itself dramatically. It could begin as heat around a cut, swelling under the skin, pain in a tooth, or weakness that made the body feel heavy. A scratch from stone, wood, bone, or animal hide could become serious if dirt stayed inside it. A bite could carry infection deeper than a simple cut. A broken bone could heal badly if the person could not rest long enough. A wound on the leg could reduce movement, and reduced movement could mean less food, less safety, and more dependence on others. In a small group, care mattered greatly. People almost certainly helped one another, cleaned wounds in the ways they knew, used plant knowledge where it existed, and protected injured members when they could. Some ancient bones show signs that people survived injuries long enough for healing to occur, which tells us that care was real. But care had limits. A group could keep someone near the fire, share food, and slow its movement for a while, yet it could not always stop infection once it had spread through the body. This is where the question of age becomes more physical. To reach 30, a person had to survive not one wound, but many possible openings where the outside world could enter the body. The earliest humans lived close to stone edges, animal remains, sharp plants, rough ground, biting insects, and smoke-filled shelters. Their hands touched soil, blood, hides, roots, bones, and water sources that could not be made fully clean. This closeness to the world gave knowledge and skill, but it also meant the boundary between body and environment was thin. The skin was the wall, and when that wall broke, there were few deeper defenses beyond the body itself and the care of others. Teeth created another quiet danger. A painful tooth may sound minor, but for someone who needed to chew tough food, carry on through hunger, and maintain strength, mouth infection could become more than discomfort. Severe dental disease can affect eating, sleep, and general health. Archaeologists often find worn teeth, missing teeth, and signs of dental stress in ancient remains, though the pattern varied by place, diet, and time. These traces remind us that survival was not only about escaping predators or enduring storms. It was also about whether a body could keep eating, healing, and moving after ordinary damage. A prehistoric person did not need to be old to be worn down by infection. A young adult could be strong in the morning and vulnerable after a wound became inflamed. A child could lose strength after stomach illness. A mother recovering from birth could face danger if infection entered when her body was already strained. So the road to 30 passed through many small injuries that modern people might barely remember. In prehistory, the smallest break in the body could become a turning point, because there was no strong wall between daily life and biological risk. A small wound can look harmless when we imagine it from the safety of the present. A cut on the foot, a torn palm, a bite that breaks the skin, a thorn that goes too deep, a tooth that begins to ache. Today, these things are often treated quickly, cleaned, covered, watched, or brought to someone with medicine. In prehistory, the same small opening in the body could become a passage for danger. This is one of the quiet reasons many humans may never have reached 30. The body was not weak. Skin can close, blood can clot, bone can mend, the immune system can fight, but healing is not magic. It needs time, energy, rest, warmth, and a body strong enough to keep defending itself. In the ancient world, those conditions were never guaranteed. A person with an injured foot might still need to walk. A person with a cut hand might still need to carry, scrape, dig, climb, gather, or hold a child. A person with fever might still be lying in a camp where smoke, cold, insects, and hunger kept pressing in. The wound itself was only the beginning. What came after could decide whether the body returned to life or slowly lost ground. Before antibiotics, before antiseptic surgery, before clean bandages, before a full understanding of microbes, infection was one of the great invisible forces around human life. It did not need to announce itself dramatically. It could begin as heat around a cut, swelling under the skin, pain in a tooth, or weakness that made the body feel heavy. A scratch from stone, wood, bone, or animal hide could become serious if dirt stayed inside it. A bite could carry infection deeper than a simple cut. A broken bone could heal badly if the person could not rest long enough. A wound on the leg could reduce movement, and reduced movement could mean less food, less safety, and more dependence on others. In a small group, care mattered greatly. People almost certainly helped one another, cleaned wounds in the ways they knew, used plant knowledge where it existed, and protected injured members when they could. Some ancient bones show signs that people survived injuries long enough for healing to occur, which tells us that care was real, but care had limits. A group could keep someone near the fire, share food, and slow its movement for a while, yet it could not always stop infection once it had spread through the body. This is where the question of age becomes more physical. To reach 30, a person had to survive not one wound, but many possible openings where the outside world could enter the body. The earliest humans lived close to stone edges, animal remains, sharp plants, rough ground, biting insects, and smoke-filled shelters. Their hands touched soil, blood, hides, roots, bones, and water sources that could not be made fully clean. This closeness to the world gave knowledge and skill, but it also meant the boundary between body and environment was thin. The skin was the wall, and when that wall broke, there were few deeper defenses beyond the body itself and the care of others. Teeth created another quiet danger. A painful tooth may sound minor, but for someone who needed to chew tough food, carry on through hunger, and maintain strength, mouth infection could become more than discomfort. Severe dental disease can affect eating, sleep, and general health. Archaeologists often find worn teeth, missing teeth, and signs of dental stress in ancient remains, though the pattern varied by place, diet, and time. These traces remind us that survival was not only about escaping predators or enduring storms. It was also about whether a body could keep eating, healing, and moving after ordinary damage. A prehistoric person did not need to be old to be worn down by infection. A young adult could be strong in the morning and vulnerable after a wound became inflamed. A child could lose strength after stomach illness. A mother recovering from birth could face danger if infection entered when her body was already strained. So the road to 30 passed through many small injuries that modern people might barely remember. In prehistory, the smallest break in the body could become a turning point, because there was no strong wall between daily life and biological risk. The danger of infection is difficult to picture because it leaves so little shape in the imagination. A broken spear point, a stone tool, a cave wall, a hearth, a path through grass. These are things the mind can hold. Infection is quieter. It is a process inside the body, often beginning after something very ordinary. A thorn under the skin, a cut from a sharp flake, a scrape on the knee after falling on rock, a cracked tooth that lets bacteria enter deeper tissue, a birth wound, a bite from an animal, or even from another human in a moment of conflict. In modern life, we often separate the wound from the world around it. We clean it, cover it, and expect the body to finish the work. In prehistory, the wound stayed connected to everything around it: soil, water, smoke, sweat, insects, hunger, and the need to keep moving. This is why a small injury could become larger than it first appeared. The body's defenses are powerful, but they are costly. Fever uses energy. Immune response uses energy. Healing tissue uses energy. Rest helps, but rest was not always easy to afford. If food was short, the body had fewer materials for repair. If the group had to move, a person could not always stay still. If nights were cold, the body spent more energy staying warm. If a wound was on the hand, work became harder. If it was on the foot, distance became heavier. The injury was not only a biological event, it changed a person's place in the group's daily rhythm. Someone who could not walk well might slow movement. Someone who could not chew well might lose strength. Someone with a fever might need care from others whose own bodies were tired. At the beginning of human life, survival was never only individual. A wound in one body could become a pressure on several bodies. Archaeology gives us a careful, partial window into this. Some ancient skeletons show healed fractures, old injuries, and signs that people survived trauma for long enough that bone could repair itself. That matters. It means injured people were not simply abandoned every time they became weak. Care existed. Patience existed. Human groups could protect members who were temporarily unable to live at full strength. But healed bone also reminds us of the other side. For every injury that healed well enough to leave a mark, there may have been injuries that did not. A person who died quickly from infection might leave less obvious evidence. Soft tissues disappear. Fever does not carve a clear message into stone. Blood loss, sepsis, stomach illness, and many infections may pass through the record almost silently. So the danger that shortened many lives was not always the kind we can easily see. It may have been present in the missing evidence itself. Teeth are especially important because they sit at the border between daily life and long-term survival. A tooth is not just a tooth when food is hard, cooking is uneven, and pain cannot be managed with modern care. Heavy wear, abscesses, missing teeth, and jaw infections appear in many ancient populations, though not in the same way everywhere. Diet, tools, grit in food, chewing habits, and age all mattered. A damaged mouth could reduce eating, sleep, and strength. If the body was already weakened by hunger or illness, dental infection could become one more weight added to the same body. This is how the path to 30 could narrow without any single dramatic event. A person might survive one cut, one fever, one bad tooth, one difficult season, but survival depended on how these pressures stacked together. The early human body was resilient, yet resilience was not endless. It worked best when supported by food, rest, warmth, and care. Prehistory often gave some of these, but not always enough, and not always at the right moment. That is the quiet power of infection in this story. It shows that death before 30 was not always caused by great violence or visible catastrophe. Sometimes it began with a small opening in the body, and with a world that had too few ways to close it safely. A healed bone can tell us that someone survived, but it cannot always tell us how close survival came to failing. This is one of the quiet limits of reading the human past. When archaeologists find an ancient skeleton with a repaired fracture, it can be a sign of care, endurance, and time. The person lived long enough for the body to rebuild itself. Maybe others helped with food. Maybe the group slowed down. Maybe the person was protected, while the injured limb became useful again. But beside every healed injury, we have to imagine the injuries that did not heal, and the infections that left almost nothing behind. A life that ended from fever after a cut may not leave a clear message in bone. A person who died after a wound became infected may look, thousands of years later, less dramatic than someone whose broken arm healed crookedly. The visible evidence can show survival, but the invisible evidence may hide many losses. This makes infection one of the most important forces behind the question of why many humans in prehistory never reached 30. It was not always the first injury that ended a life. It was often what followed. The body opened, and the world entered. Soil, bacteria, animal matter, dirty water, insects, smoke, and repeated movement could all surround a wound before the body had time to close it. The same hand that was cut still had to touch tools, wood, hides, plants, meat, and ground. The same foot that was injured still had to carry weight over stone, mud, roots, and cold earth. A wound could ask the body for rest at the exact moment life demanded motion. That conflict between healing and necessity sits near the center of prehistoric survival. Early humans were capable and intelligent, but they could not always choose the conditions their bodies needed. Healing a wound required energy. Fighting infection required energy. Staying warm required energy. Finding food required energy. If these needs arrived together, they competed inside the same body. A young person might have survived a cut easily in a safer season, but not during hunger. A mother might have recovered well after birth in a well-fed group, but not if infection came when her strength was already low. A child might have survived fever with steady food and warmth, but not if the group was moving or the weather had turned. This is why prehistoric danger often worked through combinations. One problem made the next one heavier. A tooth infection gives a simple example. It begins in a small place, but it can change the whole body. Pain can reduce sleep, chewing can become difficult, eating less can weaken a person. Weakness can make infection harder to fight. If the infection spreads, the danger becomes larger than the tooth. In a modern setting, such a problem may be treated before it reaches that point. In prehistory, treatment depended on knowledge, available materials, group care, and chance. Some people surely endured dental pain for long periods. Some survived, some did not. The same pattern applied to many ordinary injuries. A cut, a bite, a burn, a broken bone, or a wound from daily work could become part of a longer chain. None of this means prehistoric people were helpless. They had practical knowledge. They watched bodies closely. They knew plants, fire, rest, pressure, warmth, and the habits of the landscape in ways modern people often do not. Human care is ancient. But knowledge is not the same as control. A group could know that someone was ill and still lack the means to stop the illness. A person could be loved and still die from an infection that no one could see clearly or treat fully. That is the colder truth. The path to 30 was not blocked only by large dangers. It was narrowed by small breaks in the body, by the cost of repair, and by the absence of strong protection when the body needed it most. In that sense, infection was not just a medical problem, it was a historical force. It shaped who lived long enough to become skilled, who reached parenthood, who carried memory, and who vanished before age itself could become the main danger. Hunger in prehistory did not always arrive as a great famine. Often, it may have arrived more quietly, as a little less food than the body needed, repeated over many days, then many seasons. This matters because a human can survive shortage for a while, but survival is not the same as full recovery. A person can keep walking while weaker than before. A child can keep growing, but slowly. A mother can keep feeding a baby, but at a cost to her own body. An injured adult can stay alive, yet not have enough energy to heal well. When we ask why many humans in prehistory never reached 30, hunger has to be understood in this slower way. It was not only the empty stomach at one terrible moment, it was the thin margin around ordinary life. Early humans lived by finding, gathering, hunting, scavenging, fishing, digging, cracking, carrying, sharing, and remembering where food might return. Some landscapes were generous in certain seasons. Some coasts, rivers, wetlands, forests, and grasslands could support people better than others. But food was still tied to weather, migration, plant cycles, animal movement, skill, tools, and luck. A group could know its land well and still meet a bad season. A storm could change access to food. A dry period could reduce plants and animals. A failed hunt could leave people tired and empty. A sick or injured adult could bring back less. A child who needed food most for growth could be the least able to help obtain it. Hunger was not simply a lack of eating, it was a pressure placed on every system of the body. Without enough energy, the immune system fights less well. Wounds heal more slowly, cold becomes harder to endure. Milk production may become more difficult. Muscles lose strength. Decisions become heavier. Sleep may be disturbed by discomfort, worry, or the need to keep searching. This is where hunger connects with everything that came before it. A cut is more dangerous when the body is underfed. A fever is more dangerous when there is little reserve. A pregnancy is more demanding when food is uncertain. Childhood becomes more fragile when growth competes with infection. The path to 30 did not narrow from hunger alone, but hunger made many other dangers stronger. At the beginning of the human story, food was not stored behind walls in steady supply. It existed in places that had to be known, reached, processed, and defended from time, weather, decay, animals, and other needs. Fire helped, tools helped, cooperation helped, sharing helped. These were not small achievements. They were part of the reason humans survived at all, but they did not remove uncertainty. A roasted root, a cracked bone, a gathered shellfish, a handful of seeds, a piece of meat, or a seasonal fruit could keep life moving. Yet the group still had to find the next meal, and then the next. For modern people, food shortage often feels like an event. For prehistoric people, it may have been part of the background rhythm of many lives. Not always starvation, not always crisis, but a repeated question. Is there enough for the body to repair, grow, carry, feed, and continue? This question mattered most for the vulnerable. Infants depended on mothers. Children depended on adults. Injured people depended on shared food. Older adults, if they survived into later years, depended on the group's ability to value their knowledge even when their bodies gave less labor. In small groups, food was not only nutrition, it was social survival. To eat was to remain inside the circle of care. To lack food was to feel the circle tighten. So when we look at age in prehistory, hunger should not be imagined only as bodies collapsing in a single disaster. It should be seen as a slow force that reduced the body's room for error. A person might survive many lean days, but each lean day could leave less strength for the wound, the cold night, the long walk, the fever, the birth, or the next season. Many lives may have ended before 30 because the body was not defeated by one thing, but by too many demands arriving when there was not enough energy left to answer them. Food in prehistory was never just a matter of appetite. It was the quiet foundation under every other struggle. A person could be brave, skilled, alert, and loved by the group, but the body still needed energy before it could do anything else. It needed energy to walk, to carry, to think clearly, to keep warm, to make milk, to repair a wound, to fight infection, and to wake again the next morning with enough strength to continue. When food was steady, the body had room to recover. When food was uncertain, the sane body had to choose what mattered most. Growth might slow, healing might wait, fat stores might shrink, muscles might become weaker. The body could stay alive, but it could not always stay fully prepared. That difference is important, because many prehistoric deaths may not have come from hunger alone. Hunger often worked by making every other danger harder to survive. A wound that might have healed in a stronger body could stay open longer. A fever that might have passed could take more from a child who had already been thin for weeks. A cold night could be more dangerous to someone who lacked enough fuel inside the body. A difficult birth could become more dangerous when the mother had entered it already tired. In that way, hunger was not always a single cause. It was a background condition that changed the meaning of injury, illness, cold, and reproduction. The first humans did not live in a world where food could be separated from place. Food belonged to the land, the season, the movement of animals, the ripening of plants, the depth of water, the presence of fire, and the memory of people who knew where to look. A group might remember a valley where roots could be found, a river bend where fish gathered, a stand of trees that bore fruit in certain months, or a place where animals passed at a certain time of year. Knowledge could reduce uncertainty, but it could not remove it. A familiar place could fail. A dry season could stretch too long. Animals could move elsewhere. Plants could ripen poorly. A storm could ruin a root. The group could adapt, but adaptation itself used energy. To move farther for food, people had to spend strength they were trying to preserve. This is why food shortage could become a slow trap. The less energy a body had, the harder it became to obtain more. For adults, this meant work became heavier. For children, it meant growth could be interrupted. For mothers, it meant the body might be asked to feed another life while its own reserves were low. For the injured, it meant recovery depended more on sharing. Human cooperation helped answer these pressures, and it may be one reason our species survived such difficult conditions. Food was shared, knowledge was shared, and care was shared. But sharing does not create unlimited abundance. It only spreads what exists. If the group had little, Every share became smaller. If several people were sick or weak at once, the burden grew. In a small band, the hunger of one person could not be fully isolated from the hunger of others. A child's need, a mother's need, an injured hunter's need, and an older person's need all pressed on the same supply. This does not mean people became cruel when food was scarce. It means the world forced hard limits on care. A group might want to protect everyone, yet still lack enough food to make everybody strong. That is the cold truth behind many early deaths. They were not always caused by a complete absence of love, skill, or effort. Sometimes the body simply needed more support than the landscape could give at that moment. So when we ask why many humans in prehistory never reached 30, hunger should be heard as more than an empty stomach. It was the shrinking of choice. It was the narrowing of recovery. It was the loss of extra strength before the next danger arrived. A person might survive one lean season and still carry its cost into the next. A child might live through hunger but become less able to survive infection. An adult might keep walking, but with less power to heal. Across years, those small debts could gather inside many bodies, and some lives ended before age itself had time to become the main danger. Hunger becomes most important when we see how quietly it joins other dangers. It does not always stand alone. It waits behind them. A person with enough food can sometimes survive a hard wound, a cold night, or a long walk. A person without enough food meets those same things with less reserve. This is why prehistoric hunger was not only about whether someone ate today, it was about whether the body had stored enough strength for what might happen tomorrow. The human body can endure shortage for a time. It can burn stored fat, slow certain processes, reduce activity, and keep the most important systems alive. But these adjustments have a cost. If they continue too long, the body becomes less able to do the work that survival demands. A weakened person walks more slowly. A tired person makes mistakes. A thin child fights illness with less force. A mother gives from her own body to keep a baby alive. An injured adult needs more help from others, and that help also depends on food. In this way, hunger did not simply kill by absence. It killed by making the next problem harder to overcome. The road to 30 was full of these crossings. A bad season could weaken a group, then infection could enter. A long movement across difficult land could spend energy, then cold weather could arrive. A child could recover from one illness, then meet the next before strength had returned. A young adult could survive an injury, but healing could take too long if food was poor. Each pressure made the next one heavier. This is why the prehistoric world did not need to be constantly catastrophic to be dangerous. It only needed to leave too little extra. Extra food is what lets a body recover. Extra warmth is what lets sleep restore strength. Extra time is what lets wounds close. Extra care is what lets children survive when they are weak. Much of prehistory may have been lived without enough extra. The first humans began in landscapes where food knowledge was everything. Memory mattered because the land changed through seasons. A place that fed people once might not feed them the same way later. A water source might shrink. Animals might pass through earlier or later. Plants might fail in a dry year. Shellfish, roots, seeds, fruit, honey, marrow, fish, eggs, and meat could all matter, depending on place and time. Human survival came from flexibility, but flexibility did not mean certainty. People could widen their choices with tools, fire, cooperation, and memory, yet they still depended on the living world around them. The human body evolved under this uncertainty, and it became remarkably good at continuing through uneven conditions. But continuing is not the same as flourishing. Many lives may have reached the edge of survival again and again, without having enough strength to pass every later test. This is the hidden relationship between hunger and age. A person might not die during the hungry period itself. They might die after it, when the body was still paying for it. The fever came later, the wound came later, the childbirth came later, the cold walk came later. But hunger had already lowered the body's defense. In the record of the past, that connection is not always easy to see. Archaeologists may find bones, teeth, signs of stress or changes in growth, but they cannot hear the long weeks when food was just barely enough. They cannot see every night when a child slept hungry, or every morning when an adult rose weaker than the day before. Yet the logic of the body remains. Energy is the quiet currency of life. Without enough of it, intelligence, courage, and care have less power to act. This does not make prehistoric humans failures. It makes their survival more impressive. They lived by reading the land, sharing what could be shared, and building small protections against a world that did not promise abundance. But many did not reach 30 because the body could not always carry so many debts at once. Hunger left those debts inside muscle, blood, milk, bone, sleep, and healing. And when the next danger arrived, some bodies had already spent what they needed to survive it. The human body is strong in ways that are easy to overlook. It can walk for long distances, heal broken skin, repair bone, fight fever, carry children, endure heat, survive cold for a time, and keep moving even when tired. Prehistoric humans were not fragile creatures waiting for the world to defeat them. They were the descendants of many generations who had already survived difficult landscapes, changing climates, uncertain food, and close contact with animals, insects, stones, smoke, and weather. Their bodies were capable, their minds were flexible, their hands could make tools, their groups could share knowledge. So the question is not simply why they were weak. That would be the wrong question. The better question is why even a capable body could fail before 30 when the cost of repair became too high. Repair is one of the quiet miracles of life, but it is never free. When skin closes after a cut, the body spends energy. When fever rises, the body spends energy. When bone rebuilds after a fracture, the body spends energy. When a mother recovers after birth, the body spends energy. When a child grows after illness, the body spends energy. A living body is always negotiating. It must decide where to send strength, toward movement, warmth, digestion, milk, growth, immune defense, or healing. In a safe modern room, this negotiation is partly hidden from us. Food is near. Rest is possible. Help can arrive. Pain can be treated. Infection can sometimes be stopped before it spreads. But in prehistory, the body often had to repair itself while life kept asking for more. A person could be wounded and still need to walk. A person could be hungry and still need to search for food. A person could be cold and still need sleep. A mother could be recovering and still need to feed a newborn. A child could be growing and still need to fight fever. This is where strength met its limit, not because the body was poorly made, but because too many demands could arrive at once. At the beginning of the human story, survival depended on endurance, but endurance did not mean endless recovery. A strong adult might carry heavy loads, follow tracks, gather food, hold a child, and remember the landscape. But if that adult became injured during a lean season, strength could drain quickly. A body that might have recovered well with rest and food could struggle when there was little of either. The same was true for illness. The immune system is powerful, but it works best when the body has enough fuel. Hunger, cold, poor sleep, and repeated stress do not always kill directly. They reduce the body's ability to answer the next problem. This is one reason many humans in prehistory may not have reached 30. The body could survive one danger, then another, but each survival could leave a cost behind. A healed wound might still mean lost strength. A fever might pass but leave the body thinner. A bad season might end, but not fully restore the people who lived through it. Life became a chain of recoveries that were sometimes incomplete. In that chain, a person did not need to be old to become vulnerable. A young body could be strong and still overdrawn. This is the cold difference between being alive and being fully restored. Modern people often imagine survival as a clear line. Either the person lives or the person dies. But in a harsh environment, survival can have degrees. A person can survive and be weaker. A child can survive and grow more slowly. A mother can survive and carry deeper exhaustion. An injured person can survive and become more dependent on others. These half recoveries mattered. They changed the chance of surviving the next winter, the next infection, the next birth, the next long movement across difficult ground. The human body was not built only for comfort. It was built with remarkable ability to adapt. But adaptation has costs, and those costs collect inside the body. To reach 30 inches prehistory, a person often had to do more than live through separate dangers. They had to recover well enough between them. Many did not get that chance. The ancient world did not always stop people with one blow. Often, it asked the body to repair itself again and again, while giving it too little time, too little food, and too little safety to finish the work. There is a quiet mistake people often make when they imagine a strong body. They picture strength as a thing that can be spent again and again without being used up. A person walks far, lifts weight, survives cold, heals from a wound, rises after fever, and keeps going. From the outside, that can look like toughness without cost. But inside the body, every act of survival has a price. The heart must keep moving blood. The liver must manage fuel. The immune system must decide when to attack and when to calm down. The bones must rebuild after stress. The muscles must repair after effort. The brain must stay alert enough to notice danger, remember paths, and judge the small signs of weather, animals, hunger, and illness. None of this is free. The body is not a stone tool that simply remains sharp until it breaks. It is more like a fire that must be fed, protected, and given enough air. If the fuel becomes thin, the flame may still burn, but it burns lower. In prehistory, this mattered every day. A person might survive an illness, but the body could come out of it with less stored strength. A wound might close, but not perfectly. A long hungry season might pass, but leave people weaker when the next strain arrived. The ancient human body was capable of recovery, yet recovery needed conditions that the world did not always provide. This is where many lives may have moved closer to the edge before 30, not because youth itself was fragile in a simple way, but because the body could be asked to spend more than it could replace. At the beginning of human life, before towns, farms, stored abundance, and formal medicine, the body had to repair itself inside the same landscape that had injured it. A person cut by stone still lived among stone. A person weakened by hunger still had to search for food. A person chilled by night still had to wake into another cold morning. A mother recovering from birth still had to give milk. A child recovering from fever still had to keep growing. The body was always balancing urgent needs. If energy was sent toward fighting infection, less might be available for movement. If energy was spent on staying warm, less might be available for healing. If food was used to keep a child alive today, there might be little left to rebuild the adult who had gathered it. These are not dramatic choices made in words. They are quiet choices made inside flesh. Human evolution gave our species endurance, cooperation, memory, and hands able to change the world in small ways. But it did not make the body free from trade-offs. Every strength came with demand. A large brain helped humans learn, but it needed energy. Long childhood helped humans absorb culture, but it required years of care. Upright walking freed the hands, but the body still carried the strain of movement, birth, injury, and load. Fire softened food and gave warmth, but smoke, burns, and dependence on fuel remained part of the camp. Tools made survival more flexible, but tools could not remove infection, weather, or hunger. The human body was strong because it could keep negotiating with hardship. Yet negotiation is not victory. It only means the body keeps finding ways to continue until the costs become too many. A young adult might look healthy and still be living with old debts inside the body. Less fat after a lean season, a poorly healed injury, repeated stomach illness, worn teeth, broken sleep, or weakness after fever. Any one of these might not end a life. Together, they could reduce the distance between ordinary life and danger. That is why repair was expensive. It required more than biology. It required a world gentle enough to let biology finish its work. Many prehistoric humans may never have reached 30 because their bodies were not given enough long, safe pauses between hunger, infection, cold, injury, birth, and movement. They survived many moments, but some did not recover fully enough to survive the next. The body can survive many things without truly returning to where it was before. This is a quiet idea, but it helps explain much of the prehistoric age problem. A person may live through a fever, yet stand up weaker than before. A wound may close, yet leave a limb stiff or painful. A hungry season may pass, yet the body may not fully rebuild the strength it spent. A child may recover from illness, yet grow more slowly afterward. A mother may survive birth, yet enter the next months with less reserve than she needs. Survival, in other words, is not always a full reset. It can be a continuation with debt. In modern life, we often expect the body to return to normal because so many supports gather around recovery. Food is steady, rest can be arranged, infection can sometimes be treated, pain can be managed. A person can stop working for a while and still remain inside a system that keeps them alive. In prehistory, recovery often had to happen while life continued to demand movement, attention, and work. This made repair expensive in a way that modern people can easily miss. The body had to heal while still staying warm, still digesting uncertain food, still walking over rough ground, still sleeping near smoke and cold air, still helping children, still watching for danger, still depending on the group's ability to share. A strong body could do this for a while. Many did. But each unfinished recovery made the next danger heavier. This is where the path to 30 became narrow. Not because the human body ended early by design, but because the ancient world did not always allow the body enough time to complete its repairs. At the origin of the human story, strength was never separate from environment. A person's endurance depended on food, water, sleep, warmth, and other people. A clever mind could remember a better path, but it still needed a body strong enough to walk it. Skilled hands could shape a tool, but those hands still needed uninfected skin, working joints, and enough energy to grip. A group could care for a sick member, but care was limited by the group's own hunger and movement. Human survival was built from cooperation, yet cooperation still had to bargain with the land. This is why the body's strength and the body's limits are not opposites. They are part of the same story. Humans were strong because they could keep going through unstable conditions. Humans were vulnerable because keeping going spent the very energy needed to recover. Over years, these costs could gather quietly. A person might carry the memory of old hunger and reduced strength. A healed fracture might change how far they could travel. Repeated infections might leave a body less able to answer the next one. Worn teeth might make eating harder, and eating less might make healing slower. None of these alone has to be the whole explanation. Together, they show how life could shorten before age itself became the main force. A young adult could be biologically capable of many more years, yet already surrounded by accumulated strain. This is the cold difference between potential lifespan and lived lifespan. The body may have the possibility of long life, but possibility needs protection. It needs enough safe years for healing, growth, learning, and recovery to continue. Prehistory often gave people skill, knowledge, fire, tools, and community, but not always enough protection. So when many humans did not reach 30, it was often not because one great weakness lived inside them. It was because the body was asked to repair itself again and again in a world that kept taking payment. The human body was strong, but repair was costly, and many lives ended when the cost became greater than the body and the group could carry. Bones and teeth are among the quietest witnesses of prehistoric life. They do not speak in complete stories. They do not tell us a person's name, fear, memory, or final thought, but they can hold traces of pressure that pass through the body: a worn tooth, a healed fracture, a damaged joint, an infection near the jaw, a growth line from childhood stress, a break that repaired unevenly. These traces matter because much of early human life disappeared without leaving written words. Soft tissue is gone. Voices are gone. Many camps have vanished. Many children left almost no record at all. What remains is often stone, ash, bone, tooth, and the shape of places where people once returned. When we ask why many humans in prehistory never reached 30, these traces do not give one simple answer. They give something slower and more honest. They show that the body was constantly meeting the world. A tooth may be especially revealing because it is used every day. Teeth cut, crush, grind, hold, and sometimes even work like tools. In many ancient populations, teeth show heavy wear, though the pattern changes with diet, environment, and later cultural habits. Food could carry grit from stone grinding or soil. Meat, roots, seeds, fibers, and tough plant matter could demand long chewing. A tooth worn down over years is not dramatic, but it tells us that eating itself could be labor. If a tooth cracked, if decay deepened, or if infection formed around the root, pain could become part of survival. In a modern world, dental pain is already exhausting. In a prehistoric world, it could affect chewing, sleep, strength, and the ability to recover from other stresses. A mouth problem was not separate from the rest of the body. It could weaken the whole person at the exact moment when food, warmth, and movement were still necessary. Bones carry another kind of memory. A healed fracture can show that someone lived after injury. This is important because it means prehistoric groups were not simply abandoning every injured person. Some people survived long enough for bone to knit together. That survival may point to care, shared food, reduced movement, or protection from others. Human care is not a modern invention. It reaches deep into the beginning of our species, and perhaps even before our own species fully appeared. Yet a healed bone also reminds us of the cost. A healed injury might still change movement. A leg that healed badly could make walking harder. A damaged shoulder could make carrying more painful. A broken rib could make breathing difficult for a time. If the person lived, they lived with the result inside daily life. To reach 30, a body had to survive not only injuries, but also the afterlife of injuries. Archaeological evidence must be treated carefully. One skeleton cannot represent all humans. One site cannot represent all of prehistory. People lived in different climates, ate different foods, moved through different landscapes, and faced different risks. Some groups may have had better access to food for long periods. Some environments were harsher. Some people lived into older adulthood. The evidence asks us to avoid a simple story. Still, across many places, bones and teeth remind us that the ancient body was under repeated pressure. The beginning of human life was not only marked by intelligence and adaptation, it was also marked by wear. Wear from chewing, wear from walking, wear from carrying, wear from infection and recovery, wear from growing up in a world that did not protect the body from every contact. This does not mean prehistoric people were broken. It means their bodies recorded life directly. Modern people often place tools, machines, medicine, buildings between the body and the world. Early humans had tools, fire, and cooperation, but the boundary was thinner. The land entered the body through food. Weather entered through cold. Work entered through joints. Injury entered through bone. Infection entered through teeth and skin. When these traces appear in the remains of past people, they do not shout that everyone died young. They whisper something more precise. Many lives were spent under conditions where survival left marks, and where those marks could make the next year harder to reach. A tooth is a small thing, but in the remains of ancient people it can become a record of an entire life. It can show what the mouth was asked to do day after day. It can show wear from chewing, grit from food, pressure from repeated use, and sometimes damage that reached deep into the jaw. This matters because eating was not separate from survival. A person who could not chew well could not easily keep strength. A person who slept poorly because of tooth pain might begin the next day, already tired. A person with infection in the mouth might lose energy that was needed for walking, gathering, carrying, healing, or caring for a child. In a modern world, a painful tooth can feel like a private problem. In prehistory, it could become a whole-body problem. The mouth was one of the places where the outside world entered most directly. Food entered there, grit entered there, smoke, dryness, cold, and infection could all affect the body through this small opening. Early human diets were not one single thing. They changed by place, climate, time, and culture. Some people ate more meat, some more plants, some more fish, roots, seeds, shellfish, fruit, or mixed foods. Later, with grinding and farming in some places, different dental stresses appeared, but across many ancient lives, teeth had to work hard. They were not protected by modern dentistry, soft processed foods, or easy treatment when pain began. Heavy wear did not always mean immediate danger. A worn tooth could still serve the body for years. But when wear exposed deeper parts, when cracks formed, when infection reached the root, or when chewing became painful, the body's margin became smaller. This is where teeth connect back to the question of reaching 30. A person did not need to die from a tooth directly for teeth to matter. Eating less could weaken the body. Weakness could slow healing. Poor sleep could reduce alertness. Infection could spread. Pain could make daily movement harder. A small problem in the jaw could join hunger, cold, injury, and fever until the whole body had less ability to recover. Bones tell a similar story but in a different language. They can show signs of strain, injury, healing, and repeated use. A healed fracture may show that someone survived a serious event. That survival may mean the person received help. It may mean they rested long enough for bone to mend, or that others shared food while they could not work fully. This is a deeply human detail. It reminds us that prehistoric life was not only competition and danger, it also included care. But healed injuries also tell us that survival left consequences. A bone can heal, but a person may not return to the same ease of movement. A leg injury might change walking, a shoulder injury might change carrying, a damaged spine or joint might make daily work heavier. These effects would matter more in a world where movement, balance, lifting, and endurance were part of ordinary life. At the beginning of the human story, the body was the main tool. Before machines, before roads, before stored supplies could smooth every bad day, the body carried almost everything: food, children, firewood, water, stone, memory, and fear. If that body became damaged, the group could help, but the damaged person still had to live inside a demanding world. Archaeological traces must always be read with humility. A worn tooth does not tell us every meal. A healed bone does not tell us every act of care. A damaged skeleton does not represent all people in all places. But these traces point to a larger truth that is hard to ignore. Prehistoric survival was written into the body. The evidence is not only in dramatic wounds, it is in wear, repair, strain, and the quiet marks of repeated use. Many people may not have reached 30 because life placed demands on the body faster than the body could always repair them. Teeth and bones do not give us a single, simple answer. They give us a slower one. The ancient human body was capable, but it was always being used, tested, and asked to continue. The traces left in teeth and bones ask us to listen slowly. They do not say that every prehistoric life was short. They do not say that every person suffered in the same way. They do not turn one skeleton into the story of all humanity. What they do is more careful. They remind us that a human life before modern protection was lived through the body directly. The body was not carried by machines, softened by dentistry, repaired by sterile surgery, or protected by clean systems of water and food. It met the world with skin, teeth, joints, muscle, bone, and memory. That meeting left marks. Some marks show survival. A healed fracture means time passed after injury. Worn teeth mean years of use. Bone changes can sometimes suggest repeated stress or disease. These signs are not only signs of damage. They are signs that a person kept living, but they also show how expensive living could be. To reach 30, a prehistoric person had to pass through years of use before the body had worn down too far, infected too deeply, or failed to recover after one more strain. This is why the evidence matters to the larger question. Age is not only counted by years. In prehistory, age was also carried as accumulated wear. A person might be young in years but already carrying the effects of hunger, injury, dental pain, infection, pregnancy, childhood illness, or repeated movement across difficult land. The body could continue, but continuation did not always mean ease. A healed bone might preserve the memory of care, but also the memory of a changed limb. A worn tooth might preserve the memory of food, but also the beginning of pain. A damaged joint might preserve the memory of work, walking, carrying, or repeated strain. None of these traces alone can explain why many people did not reach 30. Together, they give us a landscape of pressure. They show that life did not only end from sudden danger, it could be shortened by the slow accumulation of ordinary demands. This brings us back to the beginning of the human story. Our ancestors survived because they were able to turn bodies into culture. Hands made tools, teeth processed food, legs crossed distance. Arms carried children, brains remembered places and passed knowledge forward. The body was not separate from human intelligence. It was the instrument through which intelligence acted. But an instrument used every day can wear. If a tool breaks, a new one may be made. If the body breaks, the group can help, but only within the limits of food, time, safety, and knowledge. This is the difference that modern life often hides. Today, we can sometimes separate injury from survival. A bad tooth may be treated, a fracture may be set, an infection may be stopped. A person may rest while others keep the world stable around them. In prehistory, the body usually had to remain part of survival even while injured. It still had to chew, walk, carry, heal, warm itself, and stay near the group. Archaeological remains do not let us see every life, but they help us avoid a false picture. Prehistoric humans were not simply doomed to vanish before 30. Some survived longer, and the evidence of healed injuries even suggests that care could be patient and real. Yet the same evidence also shows that survival passed through the body under pressure. Teeth and bones carried the cost of years in a world with little separation between daily life and danger. Many humans may not have reached 30 because the body had to keep working while it was being worn, injured, infected, and repaired. The past left this truth quietly, not in a written warning, but in enamel, jaw, rib, limb, and healed bone. Pregnancy and birth were not separate from the question of age. They were part of the question from the beginning. A human life did not continue only because one body survived. It continued because another body carried it, fed it, warmed it, and risked itself for it. In prehistory, this made women and mothers central to the fragile pattern of survival. To speak about why many humans never reach 30 without speaking about this cost would leave out one of the deepest pressures in the human story. A young woman might survive childhood, hunger, fever, injury, and the long years of learning the land, only to meet another dangerous passage when pregnancy began. Her body had to build new life while still living inside the same world of cold nights, uncertain food, infection, movement, and physical work. Pregnancy asks much from the body even when food is steady and help is near. In a prehistoric setting, the demand could become heavier because there was less reserve around it. More energy was needed, more rest was needed, more protection was needed, yet life did not always slow down enough to provide those things. The group still needed food, camp still had to be maintained or moved, children still needed care, weather still changed. A pregnant body carried the future, but it also carried risk. This does not mean every pregnancy was tragic or that prehistoric women were helpless. That would be false and too simple. Many survived pregnancy and birth. Many raised children. Every generation that followed exists because countless women passed through these dangers successfully. But success should not make the danger disappear from the story. The human body pays a high price to reproduce. Blood, energy, calcium, sleep, immune strength, and recovery all matter. After birth, the cost did not end. A mother might need to heal while feeding an infant. If infection entered, the danger could rise quickly. If bleeding was severe, care could help only within the limits of the time. If food was poor, milk and recovery could both become harder. If the newborn was weak, the mother's body and attention were pulled even more deeply into the effort to keep that life alive. At the beginning of the human story, motherhood was not a private event hidden away from survival. It was one of the places where survival was being made. A mother's body connected the past to the future in the most literal way. Through her, the group's next generation entered the world. Through her care, a child moved from breath to strength. Through shared support around her, the group showed whether it had enough food, patience, shelter, and knowledge to carry fragile life forward. This is why the loss of a mother could be larger than one death in a small group. It could endanger an infant. It could weaken older children. It could remove knowledge, labor, memory, and emotional structure from the group. In a world of small populations, one loss could echo through several lives. When we ask why many people did not reach 30, maternal risk matters because it touched women during years that might otherwise have been strong adult years. A person could survive the dangers of childhood and still face repeated biological demands before middle age. Pregnancy, birth, recovery, breastfeeding, and the care of dependent children could arrive close to hunger, infection, injury, and movement. These pressures could overlap. One did not wait politely for another to finish. That overlap is the key. A body might be capable of long life, but long life needs intervals of repair. For many prehistoric women, reproduction could reduce those intervals. It could ask the body to give strength outward while still needing strength inward. This is not a story of weakness. It is a story of cost. Human survival depended on women's bodies in a way that was powerful, ordinary, and dangerous. The path to 30 passed not only through wounds, hunger, and childhood illness, but also through the hidden labor of bringing the next human into the world. And sometimes, that labor took more than the ancient world could safely give. The risk carried by mothers was not only a risk at one moment, it spread across time. Pregnancy changed the body for months. Birth demanded sudden strength. Recovery could take much longer than the event itself. Then came feeding, carrying, waking, warming, and protecting a child who could not yet protect itself. In a safer world, these demands are still large. In a prehistoric world, they were placed on bodies that also had to live near cold, hunger, infection, smoke, movement, and uncertain shelter. This is why motherhood belongs at the center of the question, not at the edge of it. A woman could be young in years and still be carrying repeated biological costs that made the road to 30 more difficult. Her body might have to give energy to a fetus while food was uneven. It might have to recover from blood loss while the group still needed movement. It might have to produce milk while the mother herself needed more food, more sleep, and more warmth than the world could reliably provide. None of this means prehistoric women were only victims of their biology. They were skilled, social, observant, and essential members of their groups. They gathered, carried knowledge, made decisions, cared for children, remembered landscapes, processed food, and likely held many forms of practical expertise. But their strength did not cancel the cost. Strength only meant they could meet the cost for a time. The deeper issue is that reproductive cost could overlap with every other danger. A pregnant woman might also face infection. A nursing mother might also face hunger. A mother caring for a sick child might also be recovering from birth. A woman who had survived childhood and early adulthood might still face one of the most dangerous biological passages before the age that we now consider fully mature adulthood. This overlap helps explain why age in prehistory cannot be treated as a simple line. It was a web of pressures. The mother's body was one knot in that web, and many lives were tied to it. If she survived, the child had a greater chance. If she had enough food, the infant had a greater chance. If others helped her, both could gain time. But if she became ill, weakened, or lost, the danger could spread. An infant might lose milk and warmth. Older children might lose care. The group might lose knowledge and labor. In a small population, this was not only personal grief, it could change the survival chances of several people at once. This is one reason human cooperation became so important. No mother could carry the full cost alone forever. Human children need too much for too long. Shared care may have allowed mothers to survive more often, children to grow more safely, and groups to continue across generations. Grandmothers, fathers, siblings, other women, and other group members may all have mattered in different ways, depending on the group and the time. We should be careful not to invent exact family arrangements for every prehistoric society. The evidence does not allow that kind of certainty. But the biological need is clear. A dependent child requires care beyond a single moment, and a recovering mother benefits from support. The beginning of human life was therefore never only biological. It was social from the start. A baby survived because milk, warmth, attention, and protection gathered around it. A mother survived better when the group could make room for her recovery. When that support was strong enough, life continued. When the world pressed too hard, support could fail even when people cared deeply. This is the cold truth that sits behind many early deaths. Love, skill, and effort do not always overcome infection, bleeding, hunger, or exhaustion. The path to 30 passed through these maternal risks again and again. For some women, each successful birth added life to the group, but took strength from the body. For some children, survival depended on whether that strength could be restored. For the whole group, the future depended on bodies that were asked to create life while still surviving the same hard world as everyone else. So the question is not only why individuals died young, It is also how generations continued when the act of making the next generation carried such a heavy price. A mother's risk in prehistory was never only her own risk. It belonged to the child she carried, the infant she fed, the older children who still needed her, and the group that depended on her knowledge and work. This is why the cost of motherhood must be held carefully when we ask why many humans did not reach 30. It was not a side detail. It was one of the main places where biology, survival, and generations met. A woman could survive the dangerous first years of life, grow into skill, strength, and experience, and then face repeated demands that reached deep into the body. Pregnancy required energy. Birth required strength and luck. Recovery required time. Feeding an infant required food and water. Caring for a dependent child required attention that could not be fully paused, even when the mother was tired, ill, hungry, or hurt. The ancient world did not arrange itself around these needs. It simply continued. Nights became cold. Food became scarce. Camps moved. Children cried. Wounds opened. Fevers came. A mother's body had to continue inside all of this. That is the quiet and difficult truth. Human life continued because women carried more than one life at a time, but that same carrying made the path to later adulthood more dangerous. We should not turn this into a simple picture of suffering. Prehistoric women were not only bodies under pressure, they were people with skill, memory, judgment, social ties, and practical knowledge. They may have known where food could be found, how children could be soothed, how materials could be prepared, how danger could be noticed early, and how to keep parts of daily life moving. Their contribution was not limited to birth, but reproduction placed a specific cost on the body that could not be escaped. The human species survived because that cost was paid again and again across thousands of generations. Sometimes the cost was survivable, sometimes it was not. This is where age 30 becomes more than an individual number. For women in small prehistoric groups, the years before 30 could include not only growth and work, but pregnancy, birth, nursing, recovery, and care for more than one child. These demands could overlap with hunger, infection, movement, and injury. A body that might have lived much longer under safer conditions could be worn down by repeated reproductive strain in an environment with little extra protection. If a mother died, the loss could reach beyond her own life. An infant might lose milk, a child might lose protection. The group might lose a gatherer, a maker, a watcher, a memory keeper, a person who knew small but vital things about place and season. In a small group, one death could change several futures. That is why maternal survival mattered so deeply to population structure. It shapes not only who lived, but who could be born, who could be fed, and who could be carried long enough to become part of the next generation. At the beginning of the human story, every generation was fragile because it had to pass through bodies that were themselves exposed to the world. There were no hospitals standing between birth and danger. There were no antibiotics standing between infection and blood. There were no stored systems of abundance standing between milk and hunger. What existed was care, experience, support, and the body's own strength. These were powerful, but not always enough. So when many humans in prehistory never reached 30, part of the answer lies in this hidden cost of making humans at all. A long human life had to begin inside another body, and that beginning could endanger both lives. The future of the group depended on mothers, yet mothers lived under the same thin margins as everyone else. The road to 30 was therefore not only a road of personal survival, it was a road through birth, recovery, feeding, and the heavy work of keeping the next human alive. A small prehistoric group did not lose people in the same way a large modern population does. In a large society, one death can be absorbed by numbers, institutions, stored food, written knowledge, and strangers who can replace certain tasks. In a small group, one death could change the shape of daily life. It could remove the person who knew where water lasted late into the dry season. It could remove the strongest carrier, the most patient caregiver, the one who remembered animal trails, the one who knew how to prepare a certain route, the one who could calm frightened children, or the mother whose infant still depended on her body. This is why the question of reaching 30 is not only about individual biology, it is also about group size. Early humans lived in social worlds where every life mattered, because every life carried work, memory, and connection. A group did not need to be large for its losses to be heavy. In fact, smallness made each loss larger. When a child died, the group lost a future adult. When a young adult died, the group lost strength in the present and possible children in the future. When a mother died, several lives could become more fragile. When an older adult died, knowledge could disappear with them. These losses were not abstract numbers. They changed how much food could be gathered, how far people could move, how many children could be watched, how much danger could be noticed, and how much memory remained available when the land changed. This is one of the quieter reasons prehistoric life was so exposed. Survival depended not only on whether one body could endure, but on whether enough bodies around it could keep the social web from tearing. At the beginning of the human story, knowledge did not sit in books, maps, clinics, or stored records. It sat inside living people. A path to water was remembered by someone. The timing of fruit, animal movement, shelter places, dangerous plants, and safe materials was held in minds and habits. When people died young, part of that knowledge died young too. A life before 30 could still contain many skills, but it may not have had enough time to become a deep store of experience. Later life mattered because it allowed memory to thicken. A person who had seen more seasons could compare them. A person who had lived through hunger before might notice early signs of its return. A person who had watched children grow might understand weakness, fever, fear, and recovery in ways that younger adults had not yet learned. So when many people failed to reach later adulthood, the loss was not only emotional or biological, it could weaken the group's ability to survive future problems. This creates a difficult circle. Small groups needed people to survive so the group could stay strong, but people needed a strong group in order to survive. An injured person needed food brought by others. A sick child needed watchfulness. A recovering mother needed support. An older person needed enough shared value to remain protected when their body could not always give heavy labor. In return, that older person might give memory, judgment, tool knowledge, food knowledge, or childcare. Human life became a network of exchanges. Some exchanges were physical, some were social, some were quiet forms of attention. If too many people were lost early, the network became thinner. A thinner network made the next illness, the next hunger, the next injury, or the next birth more dangerous. This is why the road to 30 was shaped by population structure as much as by wounds or hunger. A person was never only surviving alone. They were surviving inside a group whose size, health, and memory changed the odds around them. Modern people often think of age as a private timeline. Prehistory makes it harder to think that way. To live long enough to reach 30, a person needed more than a working body. They needed enough other people alive around them, enough shared care, enough remembered knowledge, and enough continuity between generations. In a small group, every early death made that continuity harder to hold. A small group carries memory differently from a large society. It does not store the past in libraries, records, archives, maps, or written instructions. It stores the past in bodies that are still alive. Someone remembers which hollow keeps water after rain has stopped. Someone remembers where the ground becomes dangerous after a storm. Someone remembers which plant must be prepared carefully before it can be eaten. Someone remembers the path that looks shorter but becomes impossible when a river rises. In prehistory, knowledge could not be separated from the people who carried it. This means that early death was not only the end of one body, it could also be the loss of a useful memory before that memory had time to deepen. A person who died before 30 may have learned much already, but there is a difference between knowing one season and knowing many. Later adulthood allowed people to compare years, notice patterns, and remember what younger people had not yet seen. This is why the age structure of a group mattered so much. If too many people died young, the group might still have strength, but less depth of memory. If too many children died, the future thinned. If too many young adults died, the present became harder to carry. If too few people reached later life, the bridge between generations became weaker. This is one of the hidden ways mortality shaped prehistoric life. It did not only reduce numbers, it changed what the group could know, how it could respond, and how safely it could guide its children. At the beginning of the human story, survival depended on this living chain. A child learned by watching. A young person learned by following. Adults learned by repeating, failing, remembering, and adjusting. Older people, when they survived, could become living maps of danger and possibility. They may have remembered droughts, injuries, births, movements, animal behavior, food places, and the small signs that a place was beginning to fail. We should not turn this into a romantic picture where every older person was a wise elder in the same way. Human groups were varied, and the evidence does not let us describe every social role with certainty, but the basic logic is strong. A group with more surviving adults across different ages has more memory to draw from than a group where many lives end early. That memory could make the difference between moving too late and moving in time, between eating a risky food and preparing it correctly, between ignoring a fever and noticing danger, between losing a child and keeping one alive through a hard night. The road to 30 was therefore social as well as biological. A person reached it partly because others had reached enough years to protect, teach, and remember. This creates a quiet paradox. Long life helped groups survive, but groups had to survive in order to produce long life. A small group that lost too many people early had fewer caregivers, fewer skilled hands, fewer experienced eyes, and fewer chances to support the weak. That made the next crisis more dangerous. A sick child might have fewer watchers, a recovering mother might have less help, an injured adult might receive less food because fewer people could gather it. A young person might learn less because the person who knew a certain place was gone. In this way, mortality could echo forward. One death could make another death more likely, not through any dramatic chain, but through the simple thinning of care and memory. This is why many prehistoric lives may have ended before 30 inches, a pattern that was larger than individual illness or injury. The whole group was part of the survival system. Food, warmth, protection, memory, movement, and childcare all passed through social ties. When those ties were strong, a fragile body had a better chance. When those ties weakened, even a strong body had less support. Prehistoric humans were not isolated creatures facing nature alone. They were social beings whose lives depended on one another from birth onward. But small groups had small margins. They could carry loss, but only up to a point. The ancient world did not have institutions to replace a missing person. It had other people, if they were still alive, still strong, and still near enough to help. So the question of why many did not reach 30 becomes partly a question of how thin a human group could become before the lives inside it became harder to protect. In a small, prehistoric group, every life was tied to other lives so closely that survival was never fully private. A person did not simply live for themselves. They carried food, memory, protection, attention, skill, and future possibility. A child depended on adults, but adults also depended on children becoming adults later. A mother depended on support after birth, but the group depended on her strength and knowledge. An injured person depended on shared food, but that same person might later return to carrying, gathering, watching, or teaching. An older adult, if they survived long enough, might not always have given the greatest physical labor, but they could hold experience that younger people did not yet possess. In a world without writing, that experience mattered. The group's memory lived in living bodies. When one body disappeared, some part of the group's map of the world could disappear with it. This is why early death had a wider reach than the death of one individual. A young adult lost before 30 was not only a life cut short. It could be a missing parent, a missing helper, a missing gatherer, a missing watcher, a missing memory that had only begun to form. If several lives were lost early, the group did not only become smaller, it became thinner in care, thinner in strength, and thinner in time. That thinness could make the next danger harder to survive. A hungry season was harder with fewer skilled food finders. A sick child was harder to protect with fewer careful hands. A difficult birth was harder when support was already strained. A long movement across rough country was harder when the group included more weak bodies and fewer strong ones. This is where population structure becomes part of the answer to why many humans in prehistory never reached 30. The risk was not only inside the body, and not only outside in the environment. It was also between people, in the fragile web that held them together. At the beginning of the human story, survival was built through connection. A newborn survived because others fed, carried, warmed, and watched. A child survived because adults and older children made space for slow learning. A wounded person survived when others could share enough food and patience. A group survived when memory passed forward before it was lost. But each of these forms of care required people who were still alive, still strong enough, and still near enough to help. Small groups can be deeply supportive, but they also have fewer spare lives. They cannot always replace a missing person easily. There may not be another person with the same knowledge, the same strength, the same bond with a child, or the same experience with a particular place. This is why the death of one person could echo across many days after the burial, or after the camp moved, or after the name was no longer spoken in the same way. The loss might be felt in a child's hunger, in a slower journey, in a forgotten path, in a task left undone, or in a younger person forced to grow up before enough teaching had been passed on. We should not imagine every small group as constantly collapsing. Human groups endured because cooperation was powerful. They shared, remembered, taught, and adapted. Some people did live beyond 30, and their presence may have helped others do the same, but the margin remained narrow. A group needed enough births, enough surviving children, enough healthy adults, and enough older memory to continue. If too many people were taken before later adulthood, the chain between generations became weaker. That chain is the deeper shape behind the number 30. It was not just an age on one body, it was a point in a social system. To reach it, a person needed the survival of many others before them and around them. And when too many people failed to reach it, everyone else had to live with less protection than before. Some prehistoric humans did live beyond 30, and this fact makes the whole question deeper, not smaller. If no one had ever reached later adulthood, then the story would be simple. But the human past was not simple. Some people survived birth, childhood, infection, hunger, injury, childbirth, and years of movement across difficult land. Some bodies endured long enough to gather experience that younger people could not yet have. Some teeth were worn by many seasons of eating. Some bones healed from old injuries and continued to carry the person forward. Some individuals likely became older adults inside their groups, even when many others did not. This is important because the title can easily mislead the mind. It can sound as if 30 was a hard wall that prehistoric humans could not pass. But the real mystery is more delicate. The body could sometimes pass that wall. The question is, why so many lives were stopped before they reached it, while others moved beyond it? Later life was possible, but it was not equally protected. To live longer, a person had to pass through many gates without being taken by any one of them. They had to survive the first danger of birth. They had to survive the long helplessness of childhood. They had to survive fever, wounds, tooth pain, cold nights, hunger, movement, and the losses around them. If they were a mother, they may also have had to survive pregnancy, birth, recovery, and feeding a child. Each successful passage carried them farther, but none removed the danger completely. This is why an older prehistoric person would have represented something powerful. Not magic, not mystery in a false sense, but continuation. Their life meant that the body had kept answering the world. Their memory had been allowed to grow through enough seasons to become useful in a deeper way. At the beginning of the human story, experience was not written down. It had to remain alive inside people. An older adult could carry knowledge of hard years, water places, animal movement, food preparation, injuries, births, weather signs, and dangerous mistakes. They may have remembered what younger adults had only heard about. A dry season that had happened before, a route that failed, a plant that looked safe but was not, a child's illness that began quietly and then worsened. These memories could help a group avoid repeating losses. This does not mean every older person was wise, or that every group treated age in the same way. We should not invent a perfect picture of ancient elders, but it is reasonable to say that surviving longer allowed more experience to accumulate, and in a world without books, that experience could matter greatly. Older adults also change how we understand the idea that many people never reach 30. Their existence reminds us that the human body was not made only for short life. The potential for longer life was already there. The problem was that the environment, disease, injury, and social fragility often interrupted that potential. This difference is central. A person who died at 20 from infection did not prove that humans were meant to die at 20. A person who died in childhood did not show the natural endpoint of the human body. These deaths show how hard it was for life to remain protected long enough for aging to unfold. In that sense, the older survivors are like quiet evidence of what could happen when enough dangers were avoided, enough care was present, and enough recovery was possible. They also show why the loss of younger people was so costly. Every child who died early might have become an adult. Every adult lost before later life might have become a keeper of memory. Every life cut short before 30 removed not only present labour, but future knowledge. So the deeper mystery is not simply that many died young. It is that the human species depended on enough people living long enough to carry memory forward. Even while the world kept removing so many before that memory could fully form, an older adult in prehistory would have carried time in a way that was useful to others. Not just time as years, but time as comparison. A younger person might know one hard season, an older person might have seen several. A younger person might know that a certain valley had food this year. An older person might remember when that same valley failed before. A younger person might recognize hunger when it was already present. An older person might notice the early signs. Fewer tracks near water, plants ripening poorly, animals moving away, children becoming tired too easily, adults arguing more over small shares of food. This is why later life mattered. It allowed a human mind to hold more than the present moment. It allowed experience to become a kind of shelter, not perfect, not magical, but real. When many people died before 30, groups lost not only labour, but the chance for experience to thicken into guidance. A life that continued beyond the most dangerous early years could become valuable in ways that were not always measured by strength. A person with slower legs might still know where to go. A person with worn teeth might still know how to prepare food. A person who could no longer travel as fast might still watch children, shape materials, remember stories of past danger, or notice when someone was becoming ill. In a small group, these quiet contributions could matter. Human survival was never only about the strongest body in the moment. It was also about the memories that helped bodies avoid danger before strength was needed. At the beginning of the human story, this kind of memory had no safe container outside living people. There was no written record of which route became dangerous after rain. No stored medical text explaining what a swelling wound might become. No calendar showing when a certain plant usually appeared. No map marking water in a dry month. The map was in memory. The calendar was in observation. The warning system was in the attention of people who had seen enough to compare. This does not mean older adults always had authority, or that every group organized itself the same way. We cannot know that with certainty, but we can say carefully that longer life allowed knowledge to accumulate, and accumulated knowledge could help others survive. This makes early death even more important to understand. If a person died before reaching later adulthood, the loss included the years they never had to learn from repeated seasons. Their future experience disappeared before it existed. The group might still continue, but with one less path of memory forming inside it. Some researchers have argued that older adults may have played an important role in human survival because they could help with food, childcare, and knowledge. The details are debated, and they likely varied across time and place. But the broader point fits the human pattern. Our species depends heavily on learning from others. A child does not invent the whole world alone. A young adult does not discover every safe food, every danger, every tool technique, and every social rule from nothing. Knowledge is inherited through attention. It flows from older bodies into younger ones. So when enough people survived beyond youth, the group gained more than extra years. It gained continuity. That continuity could help more children live, more mothers recover, more injured people receive care, and more younger adults avoid costly mistakes. The road to 30 was therefore connected to the presence of people already beyond it. Older survivors helped reveal what a longer human life could mean. They were evidence that the body had potential, and they may also have helped others reach that potential. Yet this makes the question sadder in a quiet way. Many humans in prehistory may have carried the possibility of becoming such people, but the world removed them before that possibility opened. A child lost to fever could never become a careful observer of seasons. A young mother lost after birth could never become the grandmother who helped another child survive. A young adult lost to infection could never become the one who remembered where the group had found water in a terrible year. The mystery is not only why so many did not reach 30, it is how much human memory was lost each time a life ended before it could become old enough to guide another. The presence of older adults changes the meaning of the whole prehistoric question. It tells us that the human body was not trapped by a short natural limit. Some people did cross the dangerous years. Some lived long enough for their bodies to show age, for their memories to hold many seasons, and for their knowledge to become useful in ways that younger strength could not replace. This does not erase the fact that many died young. It makes that fact more meaningful. The tragedy was not that humans had no longer future inside them. The tragedy was that the future was often interrupted before it could unfold. A child who survived could become a learner. A learner could become a skilled adult. A skilled adult could become a parent, a guide, a teacher, a careful watcher of change. But every step required time, and time was exactly what the prehistoric world could not always give. To reach later adulthood, a person had to pass through the same narrow doors that took others away. Birth, fever, hunger, injury, infection, childbirth, movement, and loss. Anyone who moved beyond those doors carried evidence of continuity. They showed what human life could become when enough dangers were avoided, enough care was present, and enough recovery was allowed. In a small group, such a person may have been more than an extra mouth. They could be a living connection between past and future. They might remember a path that younger people had never taken. They might recognize a change in the land because they had seen it once before. They might know how to comfort a frightened child, how to judge a wound, how to prepare a difficult food, or when a familiar place was no longer safe. We should be careful not to make this too perfect. Age does not automatically create wisdom, and prehistoric groups were not all the same. But longer life gives experience more time to gather. That simple truth matters deeply for a species built around learning. At the beginning of the human story, knowledge did not pass forward by writing. It passed through bodies that remained alive long enough to teach, repeat, warn, remember, and demonstrate. If too many lives ended before 30, then too many possible teachers vanished before they became fully formed. The loss was not only counted in bodies, it was counted in unwritten knowledge. This is why older survivors make the number 30 feel less like a wall and more like a threshold. On one side were the dangerous early years where so many lives were lost before their full ability appeared. On the other side were years in which experience could deepen and begin to protect others. A person beyond 30 was not safe from danger, but they had already crossed enough danger to become valuable in a different way. Their life could help make the next child's life less exposed. Their memory could help a group move sooner, share better, prepare more carefully, or avoid a mistake. In this sense, long life was both a result of survival and a tool for survival. People had to live long enough to carry memory, and memory could help others live longer. This quiet circle may be one of the reasons human beings became so dependent on care across generations. We were not only strong because of muscles, tools, or intelligence in one person. We were strong because knowledge could accumulate when enough people survived long enough to hold it. Many humans in prehistory never reached 30 because the world often cut life short before this accumulation could happen. Yet the people who did reach later ages show another side of the story. They show that human life was always reaching toward more time, even when the ancient world kept taking it away. When we come near the end of this question, the meaning of age begins to change. At first, 30 may sound like a number about death. It may sound like a wall, a limit, a hard line placed in front of prehistoric humans. But the deeper we look, the less it feels like a wall, and the more it feels like a measure of protection. A life that reached 30 had passed through birth, infancy, childhood, hunger, infection, injury, movement, cold, reproductive risk, and the losses of others. It had survived not only because the body was strong, but because enough things around the body had held together for long enough. Food had arrived often enough. Warmth had lasted often enough, and care had been present often enough. The group had remained whole enough. The body had repaired itself often enough. This is one of the quiet lessons prehistory gives us. Long life is not only something inside a person, it is something built around a person. The human body may carry the possibility of many years, but possibility needs conditions. It needs clean enough water, safe enough birth, steady enough food, warm enough shelter, watchful enough care, and enough time between injuries for repair to finish. In prehistory, these conditions were uneven. They existed in pieces, through fire, tools, knowledge, sharing, shelter, and memory. But they were not yet strong enough to protect everyone. That is why many lives ended early, even though the human body itself was not designed only for early death. The beginning of our species was a beginning in exposure. Our ancestors did not step into the world with hospitals, stored grain, roads, written medicine, or systems that could replace a missing person. They stepped into weather, hunger, infection, animal movement, difficult births, and small groups that carried knowledge only as long as people stayed alive. Yet they also stepped into cooperation. They warmed one another, they carried children, they shared food, they watched the sick, they remembered places, they shaped tools, they made fire part of life. These acts did not remove danger, but they pushed against it. Slowly, across generations, humans built wider circles of protection. Each circle changed the meaning of age. A safer camp could help a child survive. A better memory of food places could carry a group through a thin season. More reliable sharing could help an injured person heal. Later, much later, farming, settlements, storage, sanitation, medicine, and social systems would change the odds again, though never perfectly, and never all at once. So the story of reaching 30 is also the story of how human beings slowly made the world less likely to interrupt the body before its time. This does not make modern life superior in every simple way, and it does not make prehistoric people lesser than us. It shows that we are the same kind of animal, living under different layers of protection. The ancient body was close to the ground. The modern body is often surrounded by systems built by many generations before us. We survive not only because we are personally strong, but because others have made survival easier to continue. This is a humbling thought. It means every long life is partly social. It rests on care, memory, knowledge, and safety that no single person created alone. When many humans in prehistory never reached 30, the loss was not proof that life was meant to be short. It was proof that life needs support before it can become long. The old human body already carried the possibility. The ancient world often failed to give that possibility enough room. And perhaps that is the lesson left quietly behind the bones, the teeth, the hearths, and the vanished camps. A human life becomes longer when the world around it becomes more protective. What prehistory teaches is not that ancient people were weak, or that modern people are naturally better. It teaches something quieter. A human life becomes longer when the dangers around the body are slowly reduced. The same body that once faced birth without modern help, wounds without antibiotics, hunger without stored abundance, and childhood without clean water systems now often lives inside layers of protection built by many hands before it. This is not only a story of medicine, it is a story of shelter, food, memory, care, sanitation, cooperation, and knowledge passed forward. The body itself did not suddenly become a different kind of creature. It still needs warmth, food, sleep, healing, and care. It still breaks, bleeds, weakens, repairs, and depends on others. But the world around it has changed. Many dangers that once stood close to daily life have been pushed farther away. A cut is not always a threat to life. A difficult birth is not always faced alone. A fever is not always left to run its full course without help. A hungry season is not always answered only by what can be found nearby. This change did not happen in one moment. It was built slowly, unevenly, through human learning. At the beginning of the human story, a small improvement could matter. A better fire, a safer camp, a remembered water source, a shared piece of food, a tool shaped with more care, a child watched by someone while the mother recovered. These were not small things to the bodies that depended on them. Each one widened the space between danger and death. Each one gave the body a little more time to heal, grow, and continue. This is why the question of 30 is really a question about protection. When many prehistoric humans did not reach that age, it was often because life was interrupted before the body's longer potential could appear. Birth interrupted some lives, childhood illness interrupted others. Infection, hunger, injury, childbirth, cold, and loss interrupted many more. But when protection worked, even briefly, life could continue. A child could grow into a learner could become an adult could become a parent could become a memory keeper could help another child survive. Human beings did not conquer mortality, but they made survival more shareable. That may be one of the oldest forms of human progress. Not progress as a straight line, and not progress as a reason to look down on the past. Prehistoric people were not failed modern people. They were humans living closer to the original risks. They carried the same basic needs we carry now, but with fewer shields around them. Their lives remind us that long life is not only an individual achievement, it is a collective condition. No one grows old entirely alone. A long life rests on food grown or gathered by others, knowledge learned from others, care given by others, and systems built long before the person arrives. Even now, the body's private strength is only part of the story. The rest is the world holding the body long enough for time to pass. This may be the gentlest lesson hidden inside the harsh number. 30 was not simply an age many failed to reach. It was a sign of how difficult it was for life to remain protected across enough years. And when we look back at the bones, the worn teeth, the hearths, the tools, the vanished camps, and the small traces of children who barely remain in the earth, we are not only seeing death, we are seeing how much care was required for any human life to become long. The question of why many humans in prehistory never reached 30 is not only a question about the past, it is also a question about what a human life needs in order to continue. A body is born with possibilities, but possibility is not the same as protection. A newborn may carry the future of a group, yet still need warmth before morning. A child may carry the beginning of memory, yet still need food before strength can grow. A young adult may carry skill, courage, and knowledge, yet still be stopped by infection, hunger, injury, or birth. An older person may carry many seasons inside the mind, yet still depend on the group to value and protect that life. From birth to age, the human story has always been shared. No one survives the first years alone. No one learns the world alone. No one becomes old only through private strength. Prehistory makes this truth easier to see because the protections were fewer and the dangers stood closer to the body. Cold reached the skin. Hunger reached the muscle. Infection reached the blood. Loss reached the group. A bad season did not stay outside life. It entered the body and changed what could happen next. This is why 30 became such a difficult distance for many people to cross. It was not that the human body had no longer road ahead. It was that the road was often broken before the body could follow it. Yet the same past also shows something quietly hopeful. Humans did not respond to danger with the body alone. They responded with care. They made fire and gathered near it. They carried infants. They shared food. They watched the sick. They learned the land. They remembered where water might remain. They made tools, shelters, paths, habits, and meanings. These things did not erase death, but they gave life more chances. They made the world slightly less immediate, slightly less sharp, slightly less likely to end a life at the first mistake. Across long spans of time, those small protections accumulated. The human story can be seen as a slow widening of the space between danger and the body. Not a perfect widening, not a straight line, not a promise that suffering vanished, but a real widening built by many generations whose names are gone. When we live longer today, it is easy to imagine that longer life belongs only to us, as if our bodies are simply better at being alive. But our bodies still depend on older layers of human effort. Clean water, stored food, safer birth, medicine, shelter, shared knowledge, and care for the weak all stand between us and dangers that once stood much closer. We are not separate from the people who came before us. We are living inside protections that began with them. The ancient child near the fire, the injured adult being fed, the mother recovering while others helped, the older person remembering a dry season, all belong to the same long movement that makes a human life possible. So the number 30 should not be heard only as a symbol of early death. It should also be heard as a reminder of how much had to go right for any life to continue. Every year required warmth, food, healing, attention, and the survival of others. Every longer life was a small victory of body and group together. Many humans in prehistory never reached 30 because life was repeatedly interrupted before its deeper possibilities could unfold. But those who did survive carried something forward: memory, care, and the slow knowledge that a human life becomes longer when the world around it becomes kinder to the body. And perhaps that leaves us with a quieter question than the one we began with. If our ancestors were always trying to make life less fragile, what kind of protection are we still learning to build for one another?